Yo, what's going on, everybody? Welcome back. It is a brand new episode of Liam's First Look. And today, of course, we're talking about UFC Mexico. We are going back to Mexico City. And if you guys aren't aware, Mexico City, very high elevation. So we're going to be way up in the air. We're going to be in a beautiful venue. We're going to have a lot of Mexican talent featured on the card, a lot of Spanish speaking talent as well. So the UFC has kind of finally gotten back into the swing of things in terms of their international product. We've seen a couple international champions crowned, Dricus du Plessis, Ilia Topuria. So we're seeing that international flavor back in the UFC, and we're seeing it in terms of the octagon now getting out of the Apex Center, thankfully, and back in front of these rowdy UFC fans. So should be a raucous event. I'm excited to break it down with you guys. So shout out to everybody who's making the time to be here. We're getting to you live just about midnight here Eastern time. So appreciate everybody who's rocking with us. If you don't mind, drop a like on the video as we get started. It's going to help other people find the stream. And if you guys are looking for any more information about me, about the show, go ahead and look down in the description box. For everybody who's new here, just want to say off the rip, these are not my most informed takes of the week. I'm going to come back to you guys on Thursday once I'm finished with my tape study, once I've got my write-ups already in a skeletal format. Then I'll feel a lot more confident in some of these predictions and breakdowns. But what I like to do is earlier on in the week, I'm back from vacation. I've been taking a look at some of the underlying metrics on this card, how these fighters have performed against the odds in the past. And I have done just a little bit of tape study, just a little bit of due diligence on these fighters, giving it a little bit of thought. So excited to come to you guys with my first look at the card and talk about it. And if you guys are new to the first look, then you're going to find out that we start at the top of the card and work our way on down. So starting at the top of the card, let's take a look at the main event of the evening, where we're going to be seeing a 125-pound clash, a flyweight main event between the men, that have just been fighting for the title, right? Brandon Moreno, former champion, a guy who's held down the belt, and he is representing Mexico. He's looking to get this win on, home soil, so to speak. And when we're looking at Brandon Royval, on the other hand, he was actually a short notice replacement in this fight, guys. We have to understand that Brandon Royval is replacing Amir Albazi, who's supposed to be in this spot. So you got, on the one hand, Brandon Moreno, he was supposed to be here. And then on the other hand, Brandon Royval, he just had a big opportunity. He fought 5 hard rounds against Alexandre Pantoja. Let's pull up the date on that fight so we don't speak out of turn. So yeah, 2 months back, roughly, he was fighting against Pantoja, and Tapology is now giving me a little grief here. But as we pull it up on our link, we see that 12/16, so December 16th of 2023, he was in a 5-round fight. It was a very hard fight, back and forth. They scrapped. He probably took some damage there. I would think he probably took some time off in the immediate aftermath. I'll have to listen to his interviews this week and see exactly, how much preparation that he has had, how soon after the fight with Pantoja that Royval got back in the gym. But this is a guy who I suspect will be a little bit less prepared. Now, how much is that going to hinder his performance? I think that's also somewhat up in the air. Last time out, he did fight the hard 5 rounds against Pantoja, but we know Pantoja tends to slow down. Royval tends to speed up. That was not a fight at elevation either. So that had some different unique elements to it. I think in this fight, we have a clear cardio dynamic, which is, I would say, Brandon Moreno has very solid cardio. And I think that as long as he's prepared properly, which I expect that he has, knowing that he was going to be in this main event, knowing he was going to be in this setting in Mexico, I would assume that he's done a great level of preparation. In the past, he's worked with high-level competitors. Mikey Musumeci, I had retweeted, some pictures that I had of his training sessions with Mikey Musumeci in the lead up to his previous title fight. So I've always been impressed with Brandon Moreno, but I haven't been able to get his betting opportunities right. I bet on, Davison Figueiredo the night that they went to the draw. I bet on Brandon Moreno when he lost the rematch to Figueiredo. So I haven't had a great timing of the market with Brandon Moreno fights, whereas I've actually been profitable on the Royval side. I did bet him as an underdog against Kai Kara France back in the day, a bet that I was very proud of. I picked him by round 2 submission as well in that spot. But when you look at Brandon Royval's game, a lot of what he does well is he stays composed in chaos. He creates these wild fights, and a lot of people don't like that. A lot of people like to have clean fights. They like to be able to control things. And so I think that Royval creates that disorder, that chaos that can really make people uncomfortable. I thought he was going to do better against Pantoja in the rematch because I thought he was going to be able to pace him. He was going to be able to outwork him. He was going to make him uncomfortable because that's the dynamic I had seen forming in the Pantoja fight the first time before Pantoja was ultimately able to secure the choke. And I bet Pantoja the first fight against Royval. So it was ironic. I ended up being on the wrong side of the Royval Pantoja rematch, despite being on the right side the first time. And my handicap was just that it was 5 rounds. Royval's gotten better, and he was going to be able to push a harder pace. And it turned out that the opposite was true, right? He ended up not having that great a game plan. He ended up getting taken down frequently. He didn't show that much growth or adaptation over the course of the fight. And he really didn't seem like he had the sticking power on the feet to make Pantoja pay at various points in the fight. So against some of the guys who are a little bit more chinny, let's say more susceptible to power in the division, Royval has had some opportunities to get off with big shots, put people away. But I think against guys that are a little bit more durable, that power has not always translated in the same way. The finishing instincts haven't always been there to the same degree. And I think that Brandon Moreno is a guy that has shown pretty good durability. He's gotten marked up in a couple of his fights, but he's a tough guy. He does recover well when he gets rocked. I think he can compete in the wrestling and the grappling phases here as well. Just like we saw in that first fight, a lot of competitive scrambles, but it did seem like Moreno was just one tick ahead, one beat faster in those exchanges. He's done that to a lot of guys throughout his career. And I think that both of these guys could get wild on the mat, could be looking for some finishes. Shout out to my guy, Pepe Sylvia, one of the sharpest in the game in the chat. Shout out to him. Got to take a sip of the old coffee out of respect. And just want to say, sharpest chat in the game. Appreciate each and every one of you guys who are rocking with us. We got Josh Frick saying nighttime Liam in the building. Greenbelt Warrior. Let's get it, gentlemen. Absolutely. We're live, ready to thrive. Alex representing the Mexico flag. We absolutely love it. And Pepe says, kind of think Royval ran hot and overperformed. He's opportunistic. I'm sensing Moreno sub 234. Hey, brother, I like where your head's at. I think that a lot of people, in my view, are going to expect, this fight to go the distance. We just saw against the champion, he went the distance. But I think that the lack of preparation here could hurt him. And I also believe that at elevation, that's going to be a real hill to climb. So I think that if Moreno's done the proper work and preparation, he's got the style as well as the skills to win this fight inside the distance. So that's potentially something I'll look at here down the stretch. Want to see what the pricing is like on these fights. I haven't looked at the prices in detail for a lot of these bets. So that's something I'm going to be doing overnight here. But I also think, I wouldn't put it past Brandon Moreno to win this fight via knockout. I do think he's got strikes that can close the show. I think those body kicks in particular that he was able to chew Kai Kara France up with could be a weapon that he uses in this fight as well. And so I think that this is a fun fight. I think it's a good scrap, but I think the right man is favored. If you look back, this fight happened a few years back, and Brandon Moreno was favored when that fight took place. So, to see him as a bigger favorite here after winning the title, having some very good performances and still being a young man who's getting better and had more time in preparation, it kind of makes sense to me here. So I'm going to go ahead and pick Brandon Moreno, but I'm going to do a little more study and due diligence before I place any wagers on this fight, before I part ways with my money. But I just think that the preparation, the championship medal, the favorable home crowd dynamics, the ability to push the pace, the scrambling, the jiu-jitsu, the ability to work on the feet, I think that it's probably a Brandon Moreno win and probably a Brandon Moreno finish, if I had to guess. Could be a fun scrap, though. Love the flyweight division. And, guys, this is a lightweight fight card. This is not a lot of heavyweight slangers and bangers. This is a lot of, skilled, fast, smaller fighters. So we should get some fun action throughout the card. And I think that they did that because of this elevation. They were like, we do not need to see, 15 minutes of heavyweights leaning against each other, against the fence at elevation. somebody would probably get hurt. But shout out to Luke as well. Sparring with Reality says, "What's up, Liam?" Shout out to Luke, another very sharp handicapper out there. Always say we got some of the sharpest handicappers in the game in the chat. So appreciate all you guys with your sharp insights. Excuse me. Real Fight Pick says short camp, full camp. Royval never had a chance. Wow. Royval could win more fights if they were only 1 minute in total length. Hey, I mean, I think that he's got some more chance than that. He's got some round 2 wins, but I think that's fair play. Shout out to Alex as well, longtime supporter. Odds Grappler says, "What's good, G? Appreciate you being here." So we'll keep it rolling here. We've got a great fight in this co-main event as well. A rerun, guys. Last time out, I had big units on Yair Rodriguez plus 155 against Brian Ortega. And if you look at this fight, what's funny to me about this MMA game is how public sentiment changes so rapidly, so fundamentally from the ground up. Last time that these guys fought, I could tell you guys, because I've been doing this on YouTube publicly now for a little bit, and these guys fought somewhat recently, right? So when they fought, I put out my videos. I talked about why I thought Yair was going to win the fight. After the fact, people gave me so much grief for celebrating the win. I was like, man, I thought he deserved the win. It's a crazy sport, right? Like you get injured. Hey, it's an injury business, right? You're trying to hurt somebody. So it's like, hey, if I hurt you and we're trying to hurt each other, then hey, good stuff. When I'm looking at a guy like this, I say to myself, man, Yair Rodriguez, very dangerous fighter, plus money. It was hard for me to ignore. I was like, where is Brian's huge systemic advantage, right? I was like, these guys are similar size. These guys have, similar attributes. And I just didn't think that Brian was going to blow him away on the ground. And I don't know if I was right about that. That's the God's honest truth is we did not see enough of that fight, even on the rerun, to know if Brian would have washed him on the ground. We have seen some concerning footage from Yair on the ground, in my humble opinion. Josh Emmett in round 1 knocked him down with a shot and then mushed him past his guard, was beating him up from the top position with some ground and pound shots. And then late in the fight in round 1, Yair was able to recover, grab some elbows from the bottom, try and eke back some momentum going into round 2. But it just looked like Josh Emmett was starting to run through him a little bit in round 1. And then he was able to, like I said, recover momentum. But Josh Emmett isn't the best wrestler or grappler, certainly at 145 pounds, right? So we've also seen when Max Holloway was getting bopped on the feet a little bit, when he was having a hard couple of rounds with Yair Rodriguez, he said, you know what, I'm going to take this guy down. Started shooting takedowns, started getting takedowns. And one thing that stood out to me is I did, just this fight piqued my interest, right? Like I bet this fight big last time. I made a lot of money. I'll just tell you guys, I made a lot of money betting Yair, and that's why people were mad at me, because I was happy that I made a lot of money on a fight that ended up ending in a fluky fashion. But what's interesting is now the public sentiment is completely flipped, right? Like I said, last time out, minus 175 was the price on Brian Ortega, right? And I just thought that was a little too steep. Now the price is Yair Rodriguez favored to win the fight, right? He's never lost as a favorite in the UFC. That's a fun fact for you guys. Just from a trend perspective, Yair Rodriguez undefeated as a UFC favorite. But when I just started to think about the fight, I was like, man, that's a big change in public sentiment. Is it not? Like to go from minus 175 one side, minus 175 the other side. Brian Ortega hasn't fought in between, right? He suffered an injury in the first round. That's what everybody told me, right? Everybody told me, no way it was a submission, 0% chance. If you guys go back and check the immediate aftermath, I swear to you, this is true. People were saying, no way that he won that fight by submission. Liam, that's an embarrassing take. I was like Chael Sonnen saying it's a submission. If you attempt an arm lock and hurt somebody, it's like, wow, is that not a submission in a grappling tournament? It would be called a submission if you did that. So it didn't seem right to me to take away the credit from Yair. And I also noted at the time, the better grappler doesn't always win, right? Like this is just a fundamental truth of fighting, of competing. If you have two guys that are both really aggressive, and especially in MMA where it's not just the grappling, you can punch somebody in the face, you can be hurt when you get into a grappling exchange, all these different dynamics that can change. I think that people sometimes are lost on how volatile and dynamic some of these exchanges can be. The better grappler, the better striker doesn't always win the exchange. And I think that what happened in that last fight, after rewatching it, is Yair Rodriguez was clearly getting the better of Brian Ortega on the feet. I think we could all agree on that. And what happened is Brian Ortega made a calculated decision. He said, I got to get this fight to the ground. I got to take him down. And he pushed him back to the fence, and he pretty easily took him down. And he then was caught in, a dangerous arm situation. I believe, this is my personal opinion, that he, from a little bit of a point of arrogance, didn't think he was in danger. I think he tried to rush, pull his arm out, and I think he hurt his shoulder. And I think it was just an unfortunate happenstance, but I think that the credit goes to the offensive player. I think you credit Yair, you take your hat off to him, and you say, hey, nicely done. I think that Brian would say the same thing. But does that tell me that, Yair is like a systemically better grappler than Brian Ortega? Obviously not. It doesn't tell me that at all. So I do think that this is a fight where now I would be compelled to take the plus money. Last time out, I had the plus money on Yair Rodriguez. I felt like I got the best of it. And the market sentiment has now completely flipped, right? And Ortega's not been very active. That's my concern coming into this fight, right? I wish that he had been a little more active, but he's 33 years of age, right? He's not 50, right? He's not ancient, and he's had 18 professional fights. Granted, they've been pretty brutal, right? The fight with Max, pretty brutal fight. But here's the other thing that I haven't heard anybody else's shows. I haven't listened to shit. So I don't know what other people are talking about, but I suspect that people are going to talk about the fact that Brian hasn't been active, which is fair. And I suspect that people are going to talk about the fact that he just got injured. He's had some surgeries. He's dealt with some injuries and whatever. What does his training look like? Has he been at elevation? I think these are all valid question marks, especially coming into a 5-round fight. But when I look at the ease with which he secured that takedown, when I look at the fact that Brian Ortega, he's had like a tale of two careers, right? When you look at his early career, 2014 to 2017 in the UFC, he had one takedown, 4. So he scored one takedown. He allowed 10 takedowns. So he just was getting taken down frequently and looking to pull guard, guillotine, triangles. Then he tried to adjust his game to be more of a boxer, more of a striker, but he would still mix in the occasional takedown, the occasional single leg attempt. In his fight since 2018, he secured one or more takedown in basically every fight that he's had, except the Frankie Edgar fight, where he knocked out Frankie brutally with uppercuts. I think in the first round. If I'm wrong, it was the second round. So Brian Ortega, he does have a skill set that I think should be taken seriously. I had at the time called the win over Korean Zombie one of the best performances I've ever seen in UFC history. And people, scoffed at that, or they called it hyperbole. And I think that is potentially fair, right? Maybe I was a victim of the moment, but I do think that it stands the test of time as like a clinical, excellent performance coming off of a loss where he showed every aspect of his game. He showed his striking. He showed his ability to counter. He showed his ability to box. He showed his ability to mix in the elbows. And on top of that, I liked his wrestling against the Zombie. Zombie is not easy to wrestle with. He's not easy to grapple. And what we saw there, Zombie was concussed at various points in that fight. But I thought that the timing of Ortega was really smart. He would go to the single leg, push the guy to the fence, and he's long as shit. So then he'd switch off to the double, and he'd easily get the double leg takedown. That's a smart way to play it, right? If you've got that limb length and you're pretty strong, you can create leverage. Then what else did he do? When Zombie got hit to the double leg, he started to come upper body and go for that body lock against Yair. How did he take him down? He got a underhook and just threw it like an uppercut and knee pick the other side, thigh pick the other side. So he's got essentially an uppercut driving in one direction against the fence, and then a thigh pry on the other side, and he's creating a angle against it. It was impressive, right? He just ended up getting his arm caught in there and like snapped off, right? I think that people might be counting out Brian Ortega a little bit too early. You look at the quality of competition that he's lost to over the years, it's sensational, right? He's fought a very high caliber of opponent typically in the UFC. Now, people can rightly point out, and guys, if you look at my Twitter feed, I haven't always been very nice to Brian Ortega. I've been saying, like, how the hell does this guy stay ranked when he doesn't fight, right? But that also could be by design. Like they might just like this guy and say like, hey, we'll give him a little leeway because he dealt with this injury and he's been trying to get in there and fight tough guys every time that we ask him to. And more often than not, he's gone out there and delivered. I can say with all sincerity, I thought he was going to get butchered by the Zombie. I just thought it was a terrible matchup for him. I thought he was going to not be able to take him down. I thought he was going to not be able to wrestle with Zombie because Zombie's a good wrestler. And I thought Zombie had a lot of power on the feet that was going to trouble him. And instead, he was able to bully Zombie. He was able to beat him up. He was able to land spinning elbows, all sorts of fantastic technical offense. And he looked very comfortable doing it. Then he was able to get his takedowns. Then he was able to fight him hard for 5 rounds. So is he going to be able to produce this all at elevation at 33 years of age, coming in as the underdog? I don't know. But do I want to follow the blind speculation that Yair Rodriguez is a shoo-in to do what he did last time, when everybody else told me I was crazy for thinking it was going to happen, that Yair was going to win. And then also I was a fool for celebrating the win, right? I was a charlatan for celebrating the win. So it's like people at the time thought it was a fluke win that you can't celebrate if you bet on the right side. And, the guy shouldn't have won. But now he should be a minus 175 favorite, and he's a lock to win. It's just like one of those things couldn't have been true, I feel. So, for me, it just seems like the public sentiment has so completely flipped. And you've got a Mexican in heritage in Yair Rodriguez, right? Native Mexican, awesome, against a Mexican American who claims his Mexican heritage all along the way throughout his career, Brian Ortega. Are they going to be out there just like, rooting on Ortega's downfall? I mean, maybe, but I think he could easily win over this crowd as well if he goes out there to scrap and compete. And we've seen at times Brian Ortega willing to stand there, walk people down on the feet, mano a mano, punch for punch. And I just think that Brian Ortega, fun style, fun fighter, and I think he's going to go out there to put on a show. And I don't think he's going to go out there to just concede and give up on his UFC career. So for me, fun scrap, and I think it's anybody's ball game. But for me, I'd make this a pick'em price. So at plus 155, I take Yair Rodriguez. At plus 155, I might have to take Brian Ortega. So I'm going to have to really consider this one. I'm going to have to do my due diligence. But for me, it feels like a dog or pass situation. So we'll have to see how that one shakes out. But I think it's a hell of a fight. And I think my guy Pepe, who you should absolutely be following on Twitter if you're not doing that, he has hit the nail on the head on Twitter saying Brian Ortega is a hard guy to handicap. I think that's very true. But this is a guy I bet against Alexander Volkanovski at plus 150, and he gave Volk many scares in that fight. So am I going to say that he's not a worthwhile bet at plus 150 here? I don't know. I have to think about it. Pepe Sylvia says, any feel on the total 2.5 rounds? I'm leaning over, but I think too volatile to bet. Dang. I lean with the second part of your sentiments, brother. I think the total is volatile here. I think Ortega and Yair are both live by all methods. God's honest truth. So that's how I feel about that. Any other questions that you guys have about this fight, please go ahead and submit it. I will try and get to those, and then we will move on here to the next fight. But shout out to Real Fight Pick says, when Brian submitted Cub, he was the hotness. Cornrow Brian has supernatural powers. That is absolutely true. Shaved head Ortega is also a mythical fighter. We have to see exactly what hairstyle we get from Ortega this week, but I have a feeling Cornrow Brian is going to be coming back this week. That's just my gut feel. Now, shout out to the chat. A lot of really sharp people in here. Shout out to Haunter. It says, Liam, imagine Cody Brundage chins bow. I'll tell you what, man. First and foremost, in my heart, you see this? I'm a wrestler, baby. We're rooting for Bo Nickel, okay? I'm not rooting for Cody Brundage ever, so I appreciate it, but that ain't the way I roll, brother. Also, Zeno says, I think Yair kicks his way to a victory. Hey, fair play, brother. I do think that's possible. Yair kicked and butchered Josh Emmett in that fight, and I expected him to do so. But I do think that Brian Ortega presents challenges in a lot of different phases, right? Josh Emmett, I felt like was very limited. He's a boxer. He doesn't really present many threats. Brian Ortega, brilliant jiu-jitsu, can wrestle, can strike, has some knockout power. I think he kind of presents threats in all areas, but fantastic fight. Great matchmaking. I'm glad we're running this one back. Let's see it again. Next up, guys, we've got a lightweight matchup, and this one's on the main card. Daniel Zellhuber taking on Francisco Prado. These guys are both younger than I am. I mean, for fuck's sake, what tough warriors. They're out there ready to scrap, right? Like these are two guys I feel like that are young, hungry, on the come up. But I feel like one guy that's going to bite down on the mouthpiece 100% of the time is going to be Francisco Prado. And I feel like Daniel Zellhuber has a lot of finesse. He's got a lot of skill, but I want to see that dog come out of Daniel a little bit more. I want to see Daniel out there whooping somebody's ass from minute one until the final bell. Because we have seen Daniel have these moments of hesitation. We've seen him go out there and at times, freeze up a little bit under pressure. UFC debut, jitters, happens to, better fighters, happens to great fighters. It's no sweat off your nose. But then to go out there and have some sketchy moments against Christos Giagos, obviously a seasoned competitor, obviously a guy who's been around the UFC for a long time, but we could call a spade a spade. Christos Giagos has been eminently finishable for many of his UFC level opponents over the years. And I do think that that's something that we have to be cognizant of. We don't want to overvalue that win for Zellhuber. Good quality, step in the right direction. But did we see enough to say that we should be backing him in a 75% clip and a 75% indication against a 21-year-old in this spot who is going to be outsized, right? He's going to be outmatched in terms of the anthropomorphic advantages. So let's touch on those anthropomorphic advantages right now. We've got the 14-1 Zellhuber taking on the 12-1 Francisco Prado. So again, you can tell by the records, these guys have done a lot of winning. These guys have gone out there and been very competitive in most of their fights. Francisco Prado, his one loss came in a decision in the UFC debut. He was unable to get over the hump against Jamie Malarkey, another UFC veteran, a guy whose chin has been a little bit sketchy at times. So I do think that that was a winnable fight for Prado, but he wasn't able to get the job done. He was getting taken down a little bit too much, wasn't able to build his way back up. Now you look at this spot, the 24-year-old is Zellhuber. He's going to be standing 3 inches taller at 6'1" compared to just 5'11" for Francisco Prado. And he's also going to have a significant reach advantage, 77 inches compared to just 69 for Francisco Prado. So I think that Prado is going to have to close distance in this spot. I think he's going to have to try and get in Zellhuber's face. And I also think he's going to have to try to not get into grappling exchanges. The one thing about Zellhuber is I do think that he can be creative in the grappling exchanges. I had seen flashes of brilliance on the regional scene against low-level opponents, against guys that he was clearly better and more athletic than, but still, I always talk about when you're looking for guys that can get grappling success, limb length can be a huge factor. Listen, I'm a short arm son of a gun, right? I have to use a lot of pressure. I have to try and break people down. I have to get them in a compromised posture or position most of the time to finish them. If you have really good limb length, you could be in a negative posture. You could be in a bad position and create a dynamic hold that you could finish. So I do think that, shout out to Pepe. Venata, a bit craftier than Prado, though. Fair play on that. I think that is a worthwhile point to make. And he was able to survive there. Shout out to Luke. He says, thought I'd like Zellhuber more, but you hit the nail on the head. He hasn't been very consistent minute to minute. Venata fight, a concern for me. I agree. Zellhuber is hella overrated, bro. Fair play, Haunter. And Quake Burn says, in terms of what the UFC wants, if it goes to decision, Yair is way more marketable. I actually don't know that to be true. I think the UFC has a weird relationship with Yair. Yair has been cut before. I don't know if you're aware of that. But he basically refused the Zabit Magomed Sharapov fight. They were like, yeah, that's cool. Kick rocks, nerd. And they ended up bringing him back, right? It ended up just being water under the bridge. But I find that Yair has caused problems for the UFC at times. The incitement with Jeremy Stevens in that fight, that was a bad look, I thought, for the company. Could have caused a riot, honestly. Could have caused a real serious problem. And on top of that, Yair, I do think my guy Mason in the chat, right? Yair sounds like a crybaby. I have not liked what I've heard from Yair, right? He was picking Volk, and some people were in my comment section on YouTube telling me, "Oh, Yair says that Volk's going to win, so he's going to win." I'm like, I don't buy when a fighter has sour grapes about a loss, and they're rooting against somebody. And I do think that Yair has just sounded a little bit bitter and angry and salty in media. And I don't know that that's like the best look. Like it's not super appealing. It's kind of off-putting type of vibe. At least the vibe I've been getting. And I've liked Yair in the past, right? I've gone to bat for Yair, but I just find that he's always very standoffish. Michael Bisping like puts his hand on his shoulder. He's like turning around to fight him and whatever. Like he just seems to me like he's a little bit too chippy. You know, even his friend, if you remember that video, the video of Yair and his friend, he's like going crazy and whatever. Like, just seems like there's a lot of like angsty, negative energy at times around that Yair persona. But with that being said, we'll have to see. Both these guys are calling out the champ, and I do think the winner of this fight is going to position themselves, for a potential title shot. So should be an interesting one in the featherweight division. Oh, thank you for the blessings. Now, Raul Rosas Jr. taking on Ricky Turcios. That's the next one up, guys, at 135 pounds. Here, we're moving to the men's bantamweight division. And Raul Rosas Jr., he has dropped the ball in one really tough UFC fight against Christian Rodriguez. C-Rod is a guy that people are watching out for. He's a guy that definitely has that ability, to go out there and make other tough, good fighters really look like they're average, right? Cameron Simon, another prospect that people were looking at, he was shut down by C-Rod in that fight. So C-Rod, tough out. The UFC did him no favors there. And they found out, like, hey, Raul can go out there. He can get a win in that first round. But can he go out there and sustain against these really tough guys? I thought that he showed admirable heart and toughness. He did not get finished there. But I also thought that C-Rod could have showed a little bit better finishing instincts there. I did think that fight was in danger of being stopped at various points. So Raul, he came out like a bat out of hell in that next fight against Terrence Mitchell. But let's not get too wrapped up in that result, right? He showed good aggression. He showed good willingness to attack. He showed that his confidence was not affected by that performance. But Terrence Mitchell was not UFC level either. Jay Perrin, I would argue, is not really UFC level either. Mando Gutierrez, that was a fine win, to get on the Contender Series. But I just think that we still have to see a lot from Raul Rosas Jr. over the course of his career, right? He's got a lot of time left to show us things. He's 19 years of age. He's still on the come up. And I definitely think he's the UFC's A side in this matchup. Now, when you look at the other side here, Ricky Turcios, he's a guy that has typically been favored in his fights, especially recently, because he's been fighting pretty lower end talent in this division. Let's be fair. Kevin Natividad, Amin Zahabi, probably the best guy that he's fought in the UFC, and he lost that fight via unanimous decision. He went out there against Manny Martinez. He did get knocked out in the first round. I think the UFC looked at that and said, man, maybe we could get Raul to go out there and do what he did to Terrence Mitchell and just throw like crazy and try and put this guy out. And I do think the UFC thinks like that. I think they're trying to find guys that Raul can go out there and muscle to the ground if he needs to, try and grab a hold of them. I do think Raul is probably sophisticated enough with his wrestling, with his grappling, with his jiu-jitsu to keep this in positions where he wants to be. I think he's got to be smart about not letting Ricky get off on volume. Ricky's not the most devastating guy, though. So I think that Ricky, he would have to really be in dominant positions. He would have to make this kid work super hard and tire him out. We are at elevation, and we have seen, Raul gas out before. So that's a potential concern. Ricky does seem like a guy who could go all day. But at elevation, you see guys that have typically good cardio look terrible sometimes in terms of their cardio output. It can lead to really boring fights. It could also lead to to finishes that you don't expect. So a couple things to keep in the back of our mind there. But this is a fight I definitely need to tape. I need to see how Ricky Turcios reacts to wrestling and grappling pressure. I don't think I can think of many examples of that off the top of my head. Kevin Natividad and Amin Zahabi aren't guys that are going to bring that to you very well. Brady Highstand is somebody that will go out there and try and push that pace. Yep, Luke hits the nail on the head here. He says Ricky makes everyone work. Absolutely. Jay Perrin is a barber. Fair play. I hope that he's doing well with his barber career. If Yair wins, he will get title shot easily, in my opinion. I agree. I think that if Ortega wins, he's getting the title shot as well. Ortega coming off an L has a hard sell to get a title shot off a win here. I mean, his L was a injury to the same guy. So I think it would be kind of redemptive if he beats Yair here. And I do think that, when you talk about who was the other guy that gave Volk a scare? It is a guy like Ortega, whereas Yair got washed. He kind of got rinsed, and I bet Yair in that spot. I bet Ortega, I bet Yair, and I bet Ilya Taporia. Only 3 times I ever faded Volkanovski. And, I thought that Brian was the guy that came closest before Ilya. And I thought that Yair really disappointed me in that fight. I thought he had all the skills to make it a tougher fight, and I thought he didn't bring all of his skills to bear in that fight. So Pepe says Ricky can be taken down by a light gust of wind. That sounds like a recipe for disaster against Raul here. So I think the question then becomes, can Raul get the finish? Everybody's expecting him to win this fight by submission. Man, I don't think that Ricky is a guy who's going to give up very easily. Like, could you out grapple him? Could you get him in a bad position? I suppose so, but I think it's maybe even more likely that Raul wins this fight by knockout based on the aggression he showed in his last fight. He didn't look like he was interested in grappling at all. And if he can take Ricky down and get to dominant positions, he might try and open up with some ground and pound here. But we'll have to see. We'll have to see. This should be a fun scrap, and I'm excited for both these guys. I actually am excited for both these guys' careers. I like Ricky. I think he's a fun guy. But at 30 years of age, I don't know that he's necessarily going to make that huge next step up. I think he's going to always be a fun TV type of fighter. And I think Raul Rosas Jr., they'd like to keep developing this guy. They'd like to see if he's able to, become something special. So I think they're going to continue to try and develop him the right way. And I think this is the right step. But it's not going to be easy. Should be a good scrap. Next up, guys, we've got Yasmin Waregi taking on Sam Hughes. Yaz Jitsu at 115 pounds here, the women's strawweight division. Yasmin Waregi broke my heart. I thought she was going to be, one of the most special prospects at 115. I liked her film coming into the UFC. I thought she was juiced to the gills. I thought that she, had some jiu-jitsu in her back pocket. Yaz Jitsu, right? Purple belt, but on the come up, working on her skills, working on her craft, and also had some power, right? Got in women's face, was throwing shots, was getting, hot and heavy in the boxing. And I just haven't loved what I've seen from her in the UFC. At times, a little bit too reactive for my liking. We saw last time out against Denise Gomes very quickly, walked down, hit with big shots, blasted, hurt, and ended up getting put away there. Not the first time that we've seen her get hurt with some shots. Yasmin Lucindo really tested her as well in that fight. I thought that she was going to be able to finish Yasmin. Yasmin was coming in, a little bit less prepared in that spot. She wasn't able to do so, right? We did see Yasmin Lucindo has been a revelation. She's been a very good fighter, but I thought that even in that fight, she gave me a little bit of a doubt. She gave me a little bit of a scare. And the Estela Nunes fight just doesn't really tell me much, right? Estela Nunes has struggled to get off the ground in the UFC, 0-4 in the promotion. Injuries, losses, finish losses, just hasn't really looked good along the way. So I think that we have a tough time evaluating where exactly Yasmin Waregi is at. She's 24 years of age, right? The much younger party in this spot, but she doesn't have a significant size advantage. If anything, she's going to be a little bit smaller here than Sam Hughes from everything that we could see on paper. And meanwhile, Sam Hughes is a tough woman. Has she been defeated before? Yes, she's been finished twice in a pretty extensive professional MMA career. That was via 4th round inverted triangle choke against Vanessa Demopoulos in a fight she was winning. Again, 4th round, pretty long time into it. And then a TKO stoppage, doctor stoppage due to eye injury against Tisha Torres. So losses to Loma Luke Boonmate. Loma's never lost as a favorite in the UFC. Pretty tough woman. Lost to Luana Pinheiro. Looks like she's juiced to the gills. Had a little bit of physicality edge in that fight. Lost to Piera Rodriguez, who I believe was undefeated at the time. Now 9-1 as a professional. Her only loss to Jillian Robertson. She likes to wrestle. She likes to grapple. Couldn't wrestle and grapple with Jillian Robertson. Got beat in that spot. So Sam Hughes has wins over Jacqueline Amorim. Very good jiu-jitsu practitioner who I expected to beat Sam Hughes, who I expected to finish Sam Hughes, and she was not able to do so. So that told me, man, Sam Hughes tough, outlasted her, right? Paced her. And that was impressive because Amarim tried to spend herself looking for the finish, and she had nothing left to give. Sam Hughes was able to beat her in that spot. Elise Reed, a woman that I thought was going to get the better of Sam Hughes. I just thought, man, she's got better striking technique. She could probably keep this one upright. Sam Hughes was able to go out there, get the win. Not only the win, get the finish. Take her down, finish her from the mount. Estela Nunes, again, I won't credit much that win, but she got the majority decision win. She was able to go out there, find a way to get the job done. And that was after a 3-fight losing skid in the UFC. So she's now found her footing in the promotion. She had been having 5-round fights outside the UFC. So I don't think that she is a complete pushover. I don't think she's an easy win necessarily. Fortis MMA normally has their fighters right. They normally come prepared. Now, is she training at elevation? Did she do anything to prepare specifically for this fight? I have to look into that, right? I can't come to you guys with those specifics right now, this early in the week. But I could just say that Sam Hughes has outperformed her number as an underdog 100%. And Yasmin Waregi has done the opposite, right? She's been a favorite. She's dropped the ball. She's cost you money if you've laid the price tag every time. So feels like a pretty clear money line dog or pass. If you want to get involved on Waregi, I think you got to find a prop that you like. I think you got to be a little more specific. I think tying her up in a parlay is a pretty risky proposition. I wouldn't hate it because you got the narrative on your side, maybe a little more athletic. She's much younger, but I do think Sam Hughes, not a pushover. Shout out to Jeff Bruno, says, don't sleep on Sam Hughes. Relentless grit. She could lose a 30-27 decision. Ha! Yeah, she is less talented here. No doubt about it, Jeff. But I'm telling you, I just wouldn't count her out completely. Would not count her out. Next up, guys, we can move to the last fight on the main card. We're rounding out the main card with a lightweight matchup, a fun one as well. So sip of the old coffee. If you guys have one at home, go ahead and take a sip of whatever you're drinking. Cheers to you. Next up, Chris Duncan. Not Christian Leroy Duncan. Chris Duncan, the Scottish Chris Duncan, is taking on Manuel El Loco Torres. And this is a fight where Loco Torres, he is juice to the tits, in my opinion. This guy looks like a house on fire. I've liked what I've seen from him so far in the UFC. He's been aggressive, went out there against Nicholas Mota, a guy whose chin has been, somewhat questionable at times, and he was getting clipped in that spot. He was getting, just beat up by Manuel Torres. They were having some crazy exchanges, but that elbow over the top, Manuel Torres closed the show. That was impressive stuff. Then you look at the Frank Camacho fight. I mean, that was a setup if you've ever seen one. That was a, free win, I felt like, for Manuel Torres. As for the Colton England fight, this is back on the Contender Series, right? And I actually bet Colton England. I know this is going to sound like I'm a total square. However, I had 1.25 units on Colton England to win 1 unit. And then I had Manuel Torres 1 unit at plus 600 to win the fight by knockout, because I felt like that was the way to hedge it, was just to take the money line on the other side and to take this guy Manuel Torres by knockout. I was like, this guy has been submitted in meme-like fashion. If you guys go back and watch his really old tape, his grappling looked suspect, and he hasn't been tested really in the wrestling and the grappling since. You look at Chris Duncan, he's training at American Top Team. I listened to an interview with John Hyoko this week, and I thought that what we saw from Duncan is a guy who's focused. He's training away from his family. I believe he's living at the dorms at American Top Team. And the guy trains twice a day, 4 days a week, once a day, twice a week, and then he takes off 1 day a week. And he said basically the coaches had to rein him in. They have to stop him from being so wild and aggressive. Shout out to Pepe, says, imagine getting Manuel Torres by KO plus 600 these days. That's why you got to be there for the Contender Series, right? Everybody doesn't want to cap that, but I like the Contender Series, man. You find some edges there. But in any case, we got a guy in Manuel Loco Torres who has shown some submission upside because of his limb length, right? He's got a 73-inch reach. He's a tall fighter as well, 5 foot 10 inches. I would be surprised if that's not even a little bit taller. He seems like a pretty tall guy to me when he's visually standing near most of his opponents. But now he's fighting a guy who can match some of his attributes, right? Chris Duncan is 71.5-inch reach on paper. He's going to have similar size in terms of height as well. And obviously, the UFC is trying to give Manuel Torres a fight that he can win, right? Duncan goes out there, and most of the time, he puts on bangers. He's been killed in the first round by Slava Borshev. He was nearly out on his feet against my guy, Charlie the Cannibal Campbell. And guys, I had money on Charlie the Cannibal there. And that was the last time the Christian Duncan, I almost did it to myself because I made the point before. Christian Duncan, the last time he was an underdog in a UFC fight, he went out there and absolutely knocked that guy dead. And Charlie Campbell is tough. Charlie Campbell is skilled. Charlie Campbell can compete in all positions, guys. He's not a slouch. And by the way, he's huge, right? Like, he is massive. He's a big guy. And he went out there and he landed target practice on Duncan. He's landing big shots. He is D'ing up all the takedowns. And Duncan then throws back a right hand that absolutely floors him with one shot and just off-switched him. And then he followed him to the ground and literally made sure he did the job. So I think that this guy is hard for me to fade, right? Like, I faded him with Slava Borshev, but then I laid the hammer against him with Charlie Campbell, and I gave a lot of that profit back. And it was really annoying. And when I look, I just say to myself, like, this guy embraces the grind. He's willing to go out there and push 15 minutes of annoying smother wrestling and grappling and just be, like a dog on a bone. I also think that his chin can be a little susceptible. I think that Haunter is on point there. Says Duncan has a sus chin. But Greenbelt makes another great point, right? It's tough to fade ATT fighters. I think ATT fighters tend to show up prepared. They tend to show up with pretty good game plans. He said he's been sleeping in a atmospheric tent. He's acclimated. And Chris Duncan just strikes me as a guy that's really working hard, getting better fight over fight, and really wants it. He's a guy that's hard to deny, right? Some fighters want it more than other fighters. That's a fact. Some guys want to win. Some guys want the money. They want to compete, have a fight of the night, sure. But like, at the end of the day, they'll find a way out. And I just don't think, based on what I've seen, that Duncan is ever looking for a way out. You could shut him off. You could kill him, right? He's killable. He has a hittable exterior. He could be shut down. But I don't like fading guys that are dogs. And I do think that Duncan is a dog. I think he is a guy that's going to go out there and scrap and not give up and not quit on himself very easily. I think you have to really convince that guy that he's done before he will give up. So, yeah, I don't like the idea of fading him, especially as the chalk increases here. I almost prefer the idea of the under because he does fight like a wild man sometimes. But even then, the under opens like plus 100, even money, steamed out to minus 200. Just disgusting. So I'll probably have to just let this one go. Maybe look for a contrarian end by sub in this spot. I think that both guys can win it by knockout, but I also just think they're both pretty tough. They both could get hurt, rocked, wobbled, and especially if they start to get tired here, either one of them, they could end up in really compromised positions on the ground, I feel. So shout out to Pepe, though. He said the same thing that I did. Wish there was a better price on the under 1.5. I think that's a great point. Shout out to AJ as well. It says, seen 55 Manuel Torres bets in the past 2 days. Guys, it is crazy. If you have a Twitter account, X, whatever the hell they call it these days, you see sometimes the group thing forming in real time. Sometimes I think it's organic, right? Like, people are just at their own computer. They're doing their own research. It's early in the week. They like the spot. They fire on the spot. They tweet it out. But sometimes, guys, it is literally as simple as copy and paste. Like, these people just watch what other people are tweeting. They watch what other people are betting, and they follow it blindly. And for me, I'm always going to try and give you guys independent analysis. I'm always going to try and give you guys my own thoughts. And sometimes I'll be dead wrong. Sometimes I'll look like an asshole, but I will just try not to give you what everybody else is regurgitating every week. I always try and give you some independent thoughts. I think that that's what me and Rich bring to the table on our Bets and Banter show as well. You could like or dislike any of our takes. You could agree or disagree. We'll be wrong and right many more times, but we'll always try and give you guys a real thought, a real breakdown from our mind organically, and try and separate the signal from the noise. That's what I'm always trying to do. I try and leave no stone unturned. I respect a lot of other analysts' opinion as well, but I do find that the Twitter culture especially And the reason I don't tweet out my plays and stuff like that is because it's a copy and paste culture. It is a hop on the train culture. And I don't like that shit. That's just not for me. I like to do my own work with a close network. I like to talk to people that I really respect. But I also like to, come to you guys with my thoughts, break it down, talk to you guys, have a conversation. But a conversation isn't, this guy's a lock, this guy's going to win. Obviously, I like to start with the who, what, where, and why, and just start breaking it down from there. So if y'all enjoy that kind of thing, make sure you get subscribed to the channel. We do it each and every week here, and I'm looking forward to doing it again. With a lot of great UFC action coming up week after week. Also, I'm considering doing a PFL breakdown this week. I just wanted to say I never do that, but it's PFL versus Bellator. They've got the two B leagues coming together for a big show. So if that's something you guys would be interested in, please fire that off in the comment section down below. If there's interest, I will do it. If there's not enough interest, I'm not going to stress myself to do it. There's already a lot of fights to break down for UFC Mexico, as you guys know. So without further ado, it's back to the action. I don't have a final prediction for you here. I have to do a little more tape and due diligence, but I will just say Manuel Torres feels a little bit mushy to me early in the week. I think he is a marketable guy. I think he could go out there and starch Chris Duncan. But the other thing is maybe it's a Manuel Torres decision, and that's how they scoop the book or something like that. It just feels to me like Manuel Torres by knockout in round one is the obvious, like everybody's going to be on it play of the week. And for me, I just think that Chris Duncan probably going to make that a difficult equation by either trying to wrestle proactively, trying to create space, distance, run away from him in the early going. I have a feeling he's not going to approach this like, let me just crash into this guy and try and throw big power, because I think that would be a huge mistake. And I think his coaches will be cognizant of that as well. So now let's move to the preliminary portion of the event, guys. We've been talking about the main card. I do have trends on all these main card fighters as well that is going to be shared with patrons in my navigation document. The navigation document's been up since Sunday, and I'm just adding this to the navigation document in real time to make sure the homies in the Patreon are able to get to this as we're speaking. But I also will have much more information to add throughout the week. Now, what I'm looking at here is the fact that you've got Manuel Torres 2-0 as a betting favorite for a 67% ROI. Chris Duncan 1-0 as a betting underdog for 150% ROI. Both these guys have been turning you a profit if you've been betting on them throughout their UFC run. So I understand the takes on both sides. Now, as for this next fight, guys, we've got a weird matchup. I said this at the time I saw it booked. Christian Quinones taking on Raoni Barcelos. And this is a fun matchup. This is a great fight. And when I look at it, I say always, why are we here? Why did the UFC put this matchup together? And I believe they want to find a matchup where Christian Quinones can go out there and potentially sneak off this knockout win over a difficult opponent, right? Christian Quinones maybe has a little bit of seasoning left to gain in his UFC run, in his UFC career. You look at his UFC career, just 1-1, did get submitted in the first round in his last fight against Kyung Ho Kang. So is that a very live possibility here against Raoni Barcelos? Absolutely. Kyung Ho Kang is a guy that has great grappling, sensational grappling, but we also know Raoni Barcelos have sensational grappling. He has the knockout win over Khalid Taha. So he's got 2 one-round fights so far in the UFC. But Quinones is representing Mexico. He's also going to go out there, in my opinion, and he's going to look for the knockout in this fight. We know that Raoni Barcelos, if you had to criticize his recent performances, I think number one, that Victor Henry fight. I had Victor Henry plus 425 as an underdog there. One of the biggest underdogs of the year. I bet him plus 425 on the money line. And I thought that it was an insane price that was being driven by the fact that Raoni Barcelos is fun, he's likable, he's skilled, but he's old. And he's in a division that's a young man's division. And so I felt like for Raoni Barcelos, we've seen him slowing down gradually over time. We've seen his ability to take a shot degrading horribly, in my opinion, in real time. I think that was evident against Victor Henry, where he was time traveling, getting hit a couple times. He was like getting hit and like looking off in the distance, trying to compose himself. And Victor Henry just doesn't have the power, I felt like, to put him away, to close the show there. He was able to do a lot of damage with accumulation. Now, Christian Quinones, I think, can close the show with one big shot in this fight. We've seen Umar as well was able to get a big win. Victor Henry over Barcelos was one of the sharpest bets of the past 2 years. I appreciate you, my brother. I was proud of that bet. I did not bet it for enough. We never bet the winners for enough, right? But I was very proud of the bet because I don't like to buy into pure speculation, especially on older fighters. Jaime Barcelos has had a lot of close fights. He's had a lot of back and forth fights, nip-tuck fights, and he's dropped the ball as a favorite before. So the bottom line and the facts are, I think Christian Quinones as an underdog is interesting in this spot. I think that Jaime Barcelos is probably a little bit past his sell-by date, but I also would be considering an under here. It's probably juice to the tits. I haven't looked at the price, but Jaime Barcelos is a guy that tends to trend towards the over. But I think that in this spot, if he wins the fight, he might just go out there and out-grapple this guy early. And I think if he loses the fight, he might get knocked out in the first round or in the first 2 rounds here against the heavier-handed younger fighter. So for me, that's how I'm looking at this fight. I'm probably leaning towards this fight going under, and I'm leaning towards Christian Quinones getting the win here. Maybe surprising people with that knockout shot. Give me Problema. We've got El Nino Problema, Raul Rosas Jr., and then we've got El Problema, Christian Quinones. Next up, guys, we've got a flyweight bout between Jesus Aguilar and Mateus Mendonca. I'm not sure exactly how it's pronounced. I will get you the facts before bets and banter. I'll go back and listen to some fights, hear some commentary. But let's take a sip of the old coffee. And cheers to that. We've got Jesus Aguilar, who's performed ably as a dog, if my memory serves. Let me go ahead and check that. Aguilar as a dog, 1-1 in the UFC. If you guys remember, he lost to my boy Tatsuro Taira. Nothing against you there, buddy. You just ran into the best flyweight that nobody talks about, Tatsuro Taira. But in any case, Jesus Aguilar, his other opportunity as a dog, goes out there, cleans him up, gets the big win. I was so devastated that I did not bet Jesus Aguilar plus 900 by KO against Shannon Ross. One of the most foolish decisions of my life. Shannon Ross has the worst chin I've ever seen in professional MMA. I don't mean to be rude, but that is an absolute fact. Also, Timothy says, I believe it was a club and sub versus Kang. I think County has a bit less of a chance of rocking Christian. I totally agree, Tim. I should have mentioned that point. That's a great point. And I do agree with you. And Jeff says, no harm in getting sub by Tyra, but his sub defense in Dana White Contender Series also looked alarming. I tend to agree. I think that there's 2 interesting ways to play this fight. And let me get into them both, right? I haven't looked at prices, anything like that. So these are all price contingent. But a couple of the things I was thinking about are both of these guys are submission threats. I think that people don't necessarily consider that Aguilar, before that knockout of Shannon Ross, I don't know that he's ever knocked out anybody, right? He's a guy that tends to go out there and find submissions. I think people might be surprised to know as well that he's been 5 rounds before, and he did get a submission late in a 5-round fight against Edgar Chavez. So he's shown that he could go out there and compete with UFC level competition deep into a fight. And I think that for Jesus Aguilar, that could be a game changer against a guy like Mateus Mendonca. Mendonca has been struggling, I feel like, with the cardio in his UFC fights, struggling to keep up over the course of 15 minutes. He went out there and competed with Bashra. He had some interesting moments, some interesting looks, but then to go out there and get flattened by Nate Maness like that, Nate Maness is Kentucky tough. He's got power. He's got big hands, but his first fight at flyweight, he looked not very good. And then in that fight, he looked like a world beater, sensational against Mendonca. So when I'm looking at this fight, I say to myself, you got 2 guys here with viable paths. I think Jesus Aguilar could make a mistake on the ground and get caught in this fight, but I also think he could clip Mendonca. I think he could outlast Mendonca, and I think he could guillotine Mendonca because I don't like how Mendonca reacts to being pressured, to being put in duress. I think he could make a mistake and pay for it. Now, the difference is here, Mendonca is a pretty high-level grappler from my understanding. I believe he's won, Brazilian championships at the purple belt level. I don't know that he's ever ascended past that level. I think he's a brown belt now. But again, this is something I'm going to check. I was looking on his social media. He's a guy that looked like he used to train a lot more in the gi. Now trains a lot more no gi. Understandable, considering he's a mixed martial arts fighter now. Before he was a grappling competitor mostly. But I do think that Mendonca offers some viability. Like he can win this fight. I do think he can submit Aguilar. I think he can win it by knockout. I think he can win it by decision, live by all methods. But he's a guy that I also find difficult to trust. I do think that he's taking on a Mexican underdog. That's something I want to consider here as well. And Aguilar, it's interesting that he's coming into this fight as a dog coming off a knockout, right? People are giving him no credit for the Shannon Ross knockout. I don't really give him much credit for that either. But maybe they're not, giving him any credit for the wins that he has prior either. Like Edgar Chairez is a -2XX favorite on this fight card, and Jesus Aguilar has a win over him. So he could clearly win UFC level fights. We know that to be true. Can he win this one at elevation against Mendonca? Guess we'll only find out on Saturday night, but should be a fun scrap. And I'd say I'm leaning towards that fight not going the distance. I think they're going to fight like two banshees. Next up, guys. Speaking of, we've got Edgar Chairez up next. We've got him taking on Daniel Lacerda, and this fight has already happened once. I've broken this fight down a number of times. So shout out to everybody who's rocking with us. Want to say appreciate you all being here. Rips and Picks in the chat says Jason Witt might give him a run for his money on the worst chin. But Jason Witt has had flashes of a brilliant chin. You must remember. Mendonca and Naimov for all the coin. Okay. So Bumba Clot is on that parlay there. Coffee at almost 1 a.m. The dedication never goes unnoticed, Liam. The night is just beginning, brother. We've got plenty of great action still to break down. Make no mistake about it. So without further ado, let's move on to this next fight. And Chairez, everybody's expecting him to win this fight by submission. I think that's a little bit presumptuous. I think that he could win this fight by TKO. I think he can win this fight by decision, but we've seen that most of the time Lacerda is a self-immolator. His cardio has never really held up. So I think the idea that his cardio is going to hold up better at elevation is farcical. I don't expect that at all, but I do think we got to see what we can garner from this fight week. If Mendonca has done anything special, if he has changed his preparation, maybe that's something to consider. But overall, it just seems to me like this guy is not UFC level. He continues to lose fights at this level. He's fun. He goes out there to scrap. He's definitely come close to getting the win. He's live for a finish in round one. I think that's fair. But again, we saw that Edgar Chairez, right? Let's take a look at his record. He got finished in the 5th round by Jesus Aguilar. He got beat in a very close fight by Clayton Carpenter, where I thought he made a fair account of himself. He got finished back in 2018 by Axel Ozuna due to triangle armbar. So I guess that's a danger as well. He's been submitted a couple times. Tatsuro Taira, who I think of as very high level, very dangerous. He had some struggles with Edgar Chairez. I believe that fight was on short notice, but still, Tatsuro Taira wasn't able to finish him, wasn't able to put him away. So I thought that spoke to his toughness, his improvements over time. Has not been finished since 2020 as a professional and has been fighting some of the tougher guys of his career over that point. Clayton Carpenter, Tatsuro Taira, and Daniel Lacerda. He basically had him in a really stuck position, a tight spot, and the referee screwed him, right? The referee just intervened and screwed Chairez. And Chairez probably should have just gotten a finish win in that spot. I honestly thought Lacerda got a little bit lucky there. So Chairez probably could go out there and grab a hold of that neck again, but he might just be mad at this kid for making him fight again. And he might go out there and put a fist through his face. So I think Chairez is winning this one, guys. I really do. And I think he's going to probably knock him out. TKO, I think he's going to outlast him. I think that the Mexicans are going to go crazy for Edgar Chairez, and I truly believe he's going to get it done. But he's not a guy that I think is worth laying these huge chalk prices, in fairness. So with that being said, guys, let's move along to the next fight here, where we've got Claudio Puelles taking on Fares Siem, the Smile Killer. And Fares Ziam is making some strides, right? He's gotten 2 unanimous decision wins under his belt in the UFC, but the finishing equity has not really been there. All of his wins, I believe, in the UFC by decision, many of them close competitive decisions as well. The opposite is true for Claudio Puelles, right? He tends to go out there and either win the fight via devastating knee bar, or he tends to go out there and lose the fight himself. So he has, a handful of wins via decision, going out there, out wrestling guys like Marcus Mariano, not a very high level fighter in fairness, Jordan Levitt, a guy who is known for his wrestling and grappling, but also other high level wrestlers and grapplers have been able to submit him, like my guy Chase Hooper, which I did call and predict. But in any case, we've got this fight where I think that Dan Hooker is so much more difficult of a fight than for Ziam because he's so much more dangerous, right? Dan Hooker actually has a ground game. People will forget that he has the hangman gimmick, right? Where does it come from? That guillotine, right? He was able to pull that guillotine a number of times, finish guys at the UFC level. So if you just try and wrestle into him, he will make you pay with the guillotine. He will make you pay with his own wrestling. And he's got a big body. He's not easy to pull around. So I think in this spot, Fares Ziam, he got dominated on the mat by Terrence McKinney, and he looked horrific in the grappling in that fight. And so I do think he's making huge improvements at Kill Cliff, but at 26 years of age, I think he's still got a lot of improvements he needs to make. And I think Claudio Puelles, despite having a very limited game and sometimes looking a little fraudulent out there, I have a feeling he's going to go out there and probably out-grapple this guy. I think that he is a guy that has 5-2 record in the UFC. So despite the fact that he hasn't beaten the highest level opposition, submitting Clay Guida, I know that seems like an easy win, but like most of the time, the way you get Clay Guida is you wrap around his neck and, he panics. That was not the case. He actually got him in a tight knee bar and made Clay tap. And Clay is not like a joint submission tap kind of guy. It's like he's going to break my knee, so I better get him off of me type of tap. And I think that Claudio Puelles has good fundamentals on his knee bar and good finishing mechanics. So, yeah, it should be an interesting spot. This is the fight where everyone says they got a great price on Puelles and the tickets get ripped up. Ziam, KO, or decision. Ziam very smart and making strides. We'll see. We'll see about that. Everybody's picking Ziam, it seems to me, but we'll have to find out. Ziam's a little bit bigger here. He's going to be 6'1" compared to 5'10" for Puelles, and he's going to have a 3-inch reach advantage as well. I do think that Ziam has a chance to go out there and win this fight, but with 3 submission losses on his record, also got dominated in the grappling against Don Madge in a decision loss in the UFC back in the day. I just think that his grappling is suspect enough that I can't trust him here as a chalk favorite, especially at over 2-1. Next up, guys, we move to the flyweight division where Luis Rodriguez is taking on Denis Bondar. And Luis Rodriguez is a guy I could hardly even find his social media, but he does have a bigger following than Denis Bondar for whatever it's worth. People are picking him on Tapology. He's the younger fighter here, 24 years of age. Lazy Boy is the nickname. And I'll just level with you guys. I've never seen him fight. He lost to Jerome Rivera on the Dana White Contender Series, which is a little bit of a red flag to me. Jerome Rivera then went on to go 0-4 in the UFC and subsequently was cut from the promotion in 2021. He's never fought since. So I did not think that was a great spot there. When I'm looking at, the other loss on his career, it was Edward Morales back in 2018. And Edward Morales was 4-1 as a pro at the time. He's 9-3 as a pro today. So I don't think he has any losses that are like jump off the page terrible, especially for a 24-year-old. Losing to Jerome Rivera, not a great look. But again, when you're fighting on the Contender Series and you're only 21 years of age at the time, I'm willing to give you a pass. You lose to the 25-year-old who's got a massive height and reach advantage on you. I think that's fair play. Since then, he's rattled off a bunch of wins, but he's not beaten any serious opponents. As for Denis Bondar, I thought that this guy smelled fraudulent when he arrived to the UFC. He had beaten a bunch of guys on the Ukrainian regional scene, but he'd also been submitted at WLF Epic back in 2016. He lost to Alexander Lunga in 2017. who, seemed like a pretty ho-hum fighter as well. So I wasn't sold on Bondar coming into the UFC, and I bet Malcolm Gordon. I bet Malcolm Gordon plus 210. I think the line ended up closing way bigger. I think it ended up being a way bigger line, and one of the only. I'm very good historically at timing my bets. It's a skill I feel like that I take pride in. It's like knowing when to bet something that's going up or betting something that's going down. And I was like plus 210 on Malcolm Gordon. No way that's going to last. And I bet it. And then Malcolm ended up being a way bigger underdog. But in any case, that was a fight where I looked at it and I just said, like, Malcolm is a guy that's lost because of his chin. And I just didn't see Denise Bondar being like, oh, this massive knockout threat or something like that. 4 wins by knockout in his career, but he's 13-1 career to the submission. So he tends to go out there and look for submissions, look for his wrestling, his grappling, and Ukrainian wrestling and grappling, just like by and large as an archetype, it wasn't like sold like this is going to come in and just be like lights out winning a bunch of fights. Now, when you've got a guy in Luis Rodriguez who's never lost a fight inside the distance against a guy like this, and he's at plus money, that's certainly going to be interesting. But here's where Moyes comes in with Jerome landed more head strikes, judges' favorite, fair play for sure. So I think that this is a fight where I have to look at Luis Rodriguez and watch him fight. But I don't believe in betting Denise Bondar as a favorite, until he shows me something in the UFC. I thought he should have lost his last fight against Hernandez via finish. He did break his arm against Malcolm Gordon. That didn't speak to the greatest durability I've ever seen, but it also could be a fluke. So I'm not willing to say like, man, this guy is a fugazi or a fraud. I'm just willing to say he hasn't shown me enough for me to bet him at chalk in the UFC yet. I think he still has a lot to prove. So for me, Luis Rodriguez seems like the upside play. It would be a dog or pass situation. But shout out to Pepe with the knowledge bomb. Rodriguez hasn't made 125 since Dana White Contender Series. So how does the weight cut play? How does the weight cut play at altitude? I think those are 2 important questions. So apologies for the sneezes, guys, but that's just the way that it is. It's a one-man booth today. So next up, we've got another flyweight bout. This one is between Victor Altamirano taking on Felipe Dos Santos. And what is Felipe Dos Santos? Felipe Detona? Is that Lips on Fire? Something like that. Fun nickname, fun fighter. And I think he's a deserved favorite in this spot. Manel Cap, one of the top guys in the division, one of the guys who looks like he's poised to potentially get a title shot if he can make weight and not be such an idiot. But when you look at Manel Cap, he's a tough guy to prepare for in some ways. He's got explosive offense, difficult to get close to, and he can close distance quickly. So you have to really be calculated, thoughtful with your shot selection. Felipe Dos Santos, I thought, showed good durability. He showed good heart, a good willingness to fight. And I think that in this spot, Victor Altamirano, he has those intangibles, right? He wants to go out there and win. He wants to go out there and fight. He's not afraid to go out there and scrap. But I just think skill for skill, there's nothing that Victor really does that impresses me. He's got fairly average boxing with decent volume, but he's pretty one-note in his approach. I think his takedown defense is horrific. The looks that he's given in recent fights have been embarrassingly bad, I thought, at times on the ground. Just not a lot to offer from those positions. So I do think that this is a spot where Felipe Dos Santos is not a Mexican fighter. He's going to go out there and he's going to be against a Mexican fighter that might have the crowd behind him. So could he get robbed on the cards? Could this be a close decision? I think that's possible, but I think all the finishing upside here is with Felipe Dos Santos. I think he's more durable. I think both guys are durable, but the thing that's interesting here is just for me, the cardio dynamic. I need to know that you could trust somebody's cardio to bet them as a big favorite or even to think they're justified as a big favorite. I do think Victor can push a decent pace. I think he can go out there and fight for 15 minutes, but I just don't think there's anything special or dynamic to his game. And I do think he's going to struggle probably in this fight. So it's possible that he could, that he could do well. So interesting fight. But I don't have strong thoughts there. Victor's a little bit more experienced. But Felipe Dos Santos, shoot box gym, and I think he's probably going to get the job done. Shout out to Maryi Don Yeezy, excuse me, Maryi Don Yeezy. Says, Liam, appreciate you being here, Maryi. And guys, last but not least, we've got the 145-pound division on display. The featherweights, Muhammad Naimov taking on Eric Silva. And Muhammad Naimov, the hill man, Tajikistan, stand up, baby. Cashed him last time against Nathaniel Wood. Big underdog ticket. Was very proud of that bet as well. Stood against a lot of people there. And listen, Naimov will cheat. Naimov will poke you in the eye. He'll kick you in the nads. He'll find any way to hang on for a win. This guy, I feel like, is a gamer. And I have thought in the past, he doesn't always put out enough output. He definitely left a lot to be desired against Anglin on the Contender Series, right? That's not a great loss to have on your resume, especially when you're a big favorite in this spot. So I do think that's a concern coming into this fight. Is like everybody's now all aboard the Naimov train. And in the past, they were not all on board the Naimov train. He's been a big dog in 2 UFC fights. Now he's a big favorite. But context matters, right? He was a big dog in short notice debut against Jamie Mullarkey. He was losing that fight. It was up at 155. Then boom stick, knocks out Jamie Mullarkey, cements himself. Oh, this guy's somebody to watch. Drops down. Then at 145 against Nathaniel Wood. Nathaniel Wood is a guy who's fast. He's dynamic. He's rocked Andre Fili. He's dropped other guys at 145, I believe. He's done a pretty decent job with his offense at 145. But on the defensive side of the ball, he was not able to hold up to Naimov, right? Naimov was landing some big shots himself. He was able to muscle him around. He was able to pick up Nathaniel Wood, slam him to the ground, just out-muscle him in the clinch, use that physical frame at 145 to get better positions than his opponent. Now, Eric Silva, guys, he's a fighter I really don't believe in. He's 36 years of age. He came into the Contender Series against Anvar Banyazarov, and he was able to get the ground and pound win in that spot. But frankly, I thought that was a pretty low-level win. And then to lose to TJ Brown and get dominated in that fashion was really concerning to me. He did get some takedowns early. He could get takedowns here against Naimov in the early going. He's strong. He's physical. He's pretty bricked up. Naimov has given up some takedowns in the past. And I do think Naimov, his cardio is a little bit suspect. He does tend to slow down a little bit later on in his fights, but he's been 5 rounds before. He has fought longer, more experienced, been more active. And I think that this guy, Eric Silva, is probably going to be early finish or bust. I don't know that I trust a 36-year-old at 145 pounds to fight hard for 15 minutes. I think that's going to be a tough sell, especially at altitude. He's training with the right people. He's training in Mexico. He's trying to do the right things. But at 36, it's hard. I don't know that he can take the damage. I don't know that he can be as physical. And if you're losing to TJ Brown, I'm really not liking that look. So for me, I like Naimov. I think that Naimov is the real Tajikistan fighter. I think him and Nurullo Aliyev are the ones holding it down for Tajikistan. Excuse me. I think Muin Gafarov is not really that guy. So I think that when I'm looking at the Tajikistan stadiums full of people, I think they're going to be cheering for the Hillman, Muhammad Naimov. There you have it, guys. Our first look at UFC Mexico. It's in the books. Want to thank each and every one of you guys who joined us live. Want to thank Pepe, Josh, Mason, Maryi, Moyes, a ton of more people that I'm forgetting. Everybody who's been rocking with us. King of the UFC, Sean, Haunter, Rips and Picks, Timothy, Earth Human, Greenbelt Warrior, AJ, XBL, my guy Brian, Alex, all you guys, Hitman. I really appreciate everybody who rocked with us today. I want to say, if you guys want to support the show, easiest ways to do that, tell a friend, drop a like on the video, drop a comment below to let me know what more channel content that you'd like. If you want to hear that PFL talk later on in the week, any comments, questions, concerns that you have, go ahead and fire that off in the comments and then get subscribed to the channel. We're here talking fights each and every week. So God bless you all. Hope that you've enjoyed this conversation. Come back next time. We're having all the same fun again. And if you're looking for more information from me, it's all down in the description box down below. Cheap, affordable, high quality information that I believe in. God bless and we'll see you soon. Take care, everybody. Thank you all for the support.